Well, this month marks 10 years since the popular student-led Fees Must Fall movement protests started across the country. Now, the movement was calling for a free, decolonized education, among other things. But a decade on, the question is, have fees really fallen? Well, to help us answer this and more, I'm now joined by Asive Dlanjwa, who is the spokesperson of the South African Union for Students. Asive, thank you so much for making time for us here on this Easter Sunday. I'm sure you had some plans that you had to put on hold, but very important issue that we're discussing here, because we did see Walter Sisulu University making headlines over the past week, and it brought back to sharp focus the issues that students are being faced with. 10 years on, though, the question is, has much changed in terms of the picture of what they were fighting for in 2015 with the Fees Must Fall movement and some of the rules that they wanted relaxed in the residences and the NSFAS and the likes? Or what do you make of the progress that has been made in that time?
Good evening, Andy, to your viewers and to your listeners, and thank you for having us. Look, I will say it's not yet Uhuru. I think a lot of progress has been made on many fronts, which I will probably expand on this show as it pertains to broadening access to higher education, but also in terms of centralizing and zooming in the debate of the role of higher education within the broader developmental agenda of South Africa, and really what does it mean to society for us to be able to invest in higher education. So there is work that has been, a lot of work, has been done, and obviously in the same vein, a lot of work needs to be done. There's still many students that still do not have access to higher education. So I suppose we will expand on each of them and qualify the statements that I make in terms of the work that has been done, but also the work that needs to be done. The issue of WUSU on its own is a prime example of the fact that a lot of work needs to be done. Whilst the number of NSFAS students would have increased dramatically in the last few years since Fees Must Fall, at Walter Sisulu University, those that are funded by the state, there are still challenges in terms of the administration of that funding, but also not all students, because you will remember the council clarified that of the students that were, in fact, the student that was killed by the university was in fact in the process of re-registering, having paid out of their own pocket, I stand to be corrected, I think a sum of 25,000, which I imagine they would have had to fundraise since the beginning of the year up until now. So the point is, it's a tale of two stories.
And that's precisely why I had made an example of the Walter Sisulu University in the intro, because I want us to go into detail on some of those, strides that have been made. And one of those that you mentioned is the issue of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. You have students still waiting at the beginning of the year for those funds to be released, an issue that has been plaguing the Walter Sisulu University in particular for years, but generally the South African tertiary system. So where is the holdup, and how do you see this being resolved going forward? Because year on year, students are waiting for funds to be paid, and it does seem like it causes things such as the protests that we saw in the Eastern Cape.
So look, we've got two issues here. The first issue is that we've got an issue of trying to broaden, we've got an issue of trying to broaden access to higher education through broadening access to, for instance, the National Student Financial Aid. And to that extent, a lot of work has been done. Prior to Fees Must Fall, the numbers of households that qualified to be funded by the state was pitiful. It was not a majority, but as we sit right now, and I must give this context, more than 90% of households in South Africa qualify to be funded by the state in terms of their higher education studies, number one. Number two, prior to Fees Must Fall, whatever provision and assistance the state had been making, it was in a form of a loan that students had to pay back for many years post their qualification, which is now a full grant. Students do not have to pay anything. So a lot of work has been done to that extent. The challenge that we still sit with, however, has been leadership at the helm of the sector, but also at the helm of NSFAS, to the extent to which we can now administer the funds in a way that is efficient and that also maintains, upholds, and protects the dignity of the poor and the working class, which it has failed to do. I suppose another interesting and probably stat is that prior to fees must fall, in fact, during fees must fall, the budget of NSFAS was at 9 billion rand, and directly through the work and the mobilization and the efforts and the struggle that were waged through and during fees must fall, that budget of NSFAS now sits at over 5 billion rand from 9 billion rand within a space of less than 10 years. So work has been done. At the level of the administration, we've got to overhaul NSFAS in terms of its capacity to deliver on its mandate. The reality is that it would appear that the scheme was caught off guard when we broaden access, to the extent to which it did not invest in a requisite infrastructure and the skills to ensure that they are able to deliver on their mandate. And that is what we're sitting now with, a bunch of incompetent, dare I say, clowns in Cape Town who are failing year and year to administer the fund. And it is regrettable because the money is there. We just seemingly lacking the capacity to be able to administer that efficiently.
And how does this get resolved then, Asive? Because you're calling it shameful and regrettable, and it's something that's been going on for a number of years, and quite encouraging that the funding amount has gone up. But unfortunately, in terms of how it's being administered, much of the same that is being seen 10 years on. What needs to change?
It's not difficult. The first thing that we need to deal with at NSFAS is the issue of leadership. One, at the level of the department. There are two levels to the crisis at NSFAS. The first level is an inability of the Department of Higher Education to be able to decisively lead the sector to which it has tutelage over, a pupillage over. Why do we say that? Because what you are finding here, you are finding NSFAS, you are finding institutions of higher learning, and you are finding government directives that are all incongruent, to the extent to which you are going to have universities which are public institutions opening, making an example, on the 13th of January, starting registration. Yet another public institution which is responsible for the funding of the poor and the working class will only begin advancing funding decisions in February. And then you've got a department that, so the point here is that we need a leadership in the level of the sector to want to bring congruence and coherence in the sector and coordinate the sector, which does not exist. The second thing we need, I said it before, we've got to overhaul the leadership of NSFAS. NSFAS is almost bewitched to always and perpetually and consistently to be led by clowns who are often always and incompetent. So we've got to bring in competent skills at NSFAS. We again need to overhaul the system of funding at NSFAS. It is not able to, their current working the current processes and systems are not catered for to fund at the level at which it is funding. Even when you go to NSFAS to visit, they are undercapacitated, and those that are there do not know what they are doing, and they've not been trained to be able to cater to this. Because you must understand, between 2018 and now, literally, the funding and its beneficiaries almost tripled 4 times than what they had been funding. So those are the things we need to do. Leadership at the level of the sector, number one. And number two, we've got to overhaul in terms of skills. It's a skills and an infrastructure issue that we need to deal with at the level of NSFAS. And it requires political will, because you are correct, this thing has been happening every year without fail, almost like a song. So it tells us that even at the level of the presidency of the country, there needs to be intervention, because we can't be spending over 50 billion rand as taxpayers, and yet we're unable to administer that money.
Let's talk about how these issues are then being resolved, because, again, it might be naive to assume that all the administrative challenges are on the side of NSFAS and there's no responsibility that can be attributed to the students. In fact, they have brought up and saying, well, things would be a lot easier to administer from a funding perspective if students would uphold their end of the bargain in terms of sharing information and not providing information that, is not accurate, so that they can qualify for NSFAS funding. And they go and discover that later on. What would you say in response to that?
No, it's whoever raises that would be demonstrating an incapacity to think coherently, because it is you will get a materially insignificant number of students who would not have been able either to provide information on time or the correct information. When there is an information deficiency to the extent to which NSFAS is not able to fund, it is always at the level of universities. For instance, you would have a year where universities, including Wits University, would be sitting and withholding the funding information, or rather the registration data of thousands of students from NSFAS, such that NSFAS is able to advance decision at its major scale, to the extent to which it would have a material impact and even cause strikes. It has been institutions that have been withholding data, universities and colleges, either through inefficient systems or a deliberate ploy to as we saw, for instance, with accommodation and allowances, to sabotage the funding of the poor and the working class so that they can carry on to stay. Because you must understand that before we had the system that we're having now, where the state is building capacity to pay itself, its beneficiaries, universities had been collecting millions, hundreds and millions of rands in the administration of those funds. So when there was a change, universities began to withhold that funding, that registration data, which led to protests for the last 3 years consistently across institutions of higher learning. So the extent to which we would say students are responsible for the collapse or the inefficiency of the funding of NSFAS or any funding channels is absolutely ludicrous. They're not too big. It's just a few. Why would a student withhold their information when they need money for food, for books, for accommodation? Why would someone choose to go sleep in a taxi rank when they can just advance the correct information? So there's no such thing. It must be rubbished with the contempt it deserves.
And as we wrap things up then, Asive, is this something that is achievable? Free education. We did hear around 2017, President Jacob Zuma having said that that is what he would have wanted at the time. Still has not happened. 10 years on, fees have not fallen. Is it a dream that can be realized in this country?
Look, to the full extent, we will say that fees have not fallen and free education has not come. But it will be disingenuous and opportunistic to say that that the road that has been traversed, or the gains that have been made in the last 10 years are insignificant. As I have mentioned to you, that there is probably no a service or support of government to any sector of society that I can think of that has grown at the rate at which funding for higher education has grown. So work has been done there. You are correct to the extent to which the missing middle are still not catered for adequately as we would like them to be catered for, that students that are pursuing their postgraduate studies are also not being funded by the state, which is a serious issue if we are going to reinforce research, innovation and development towards our developmental agenda as a country, and to keep up with other countries in terms of research and development. So you are correct to that extent. There's particularly as it pertains to the missing middle, and number two, postgraduate studies, and probably number three, the efficiency of the current funding that is there. So those are the issues, but I would not altogether say that there has been, that fees must fall has not borne any results. It has borne significant results, and as really there are doctors now, engineers, teachers who have been a direct product and a direct a direct product of the struggle of fees must fall.
That is Asive Dlanjwa. Thank you so much for sharing your views here on News at Prime. Of course, he is the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students, just reflecting then on fees must fall 10 years on.